Hey, hi everyone. I am so happy to be here to talk about this project. It means so much to me and to my team, and that's kind of the second thing I want to say is that I'm here obviously talking to you myself, but I am here on behalf of a tremendous research team who I worked with last year, took up a lot of our time last year. It was time very well spent. It was Paura Kerrigan, Crystal Fulton, Eugenia Ciapera, Faye Carey, who's here right in front of me, and Fergal Keenan, who I think is probably still back at the table there. No, he's there, Fergal Keenan. We worked together on this last year. So I just wanted to kind of just make that clear that it is a team effort, and we all really enjoyed working together on this. And, you know, we found it a very, I suppose, profound experience, really, this particular topic, which you'll probably see why when I go on to talk about it more. So just to give you an outline of what we're going to talk about today, it's obviously I'm going to describe the project that we worked on, and you'll hear all about that. But as with anything I talk about, I always like to give some context at first, just to, I suppose, a lens through which we can look at the project and interpret the findings that we had. And these are topics and concepts that are of particular interest to me personally, so I suppose it's slightly indulgent that I get to talk about it in the context of this project. But I think some of the things we're going to talk about are extremely important. They're very much linked to the topic of the conference today, even though, and I will say that there's not a lot of laughs in this project, in fairness. It's not, you know, but there is kindness, and you will see kindness from libraries to the communities they serve, between librarians in the libraries who work together, and just general notes of kindness. I'll share them with you. I'll show you them because it's very important that. So while it's somewhat of a downbeat subject, it does, I promise you, end on an uplifting and hopeful note. So you have that to look forward to. So we're going to talk about that first, and a bit of the background to the project, most of which I'm sure you know about already. You couldn't miss it in the media over the past few years. How Irish public libraries became a target for anti-LGBTQ+ agitation. And we call that contested spaces. And again, I'll explain that. Of course, I'm going to tell you what we did and how we did it, the nuts and bolts of the project. And then the main part, really, is the project findings, which is entirely focused on the librarians' voices. And that was very important to us in this project, to put the emphasis on the voices of the librarians we spoke to. And I've called that narratives of disruption, trauma, and resilience. So the hopeful bit at the end, I guess. And I think you'll find, certainly some of the quotations and some of the things I'll share, you'll find them quite moving, maybe a little bit shocking at times, but we felt it was incredibly important to be able to share those voices with you. And then maybe some discussion and recommendations at the end, if we have time. Hopefully we will. We'll see how we get on. So I'm just going to move on, because I am conscious of time when I have my timer in front of me. The first thing I want to do is talk about what I call the cost of doing good work. And I want to share a couple of statements with you first, just to kind of maybe I'm not going to ask you to share with me, but just to think about yourselves, what you think. The first one is drawn from the IFLA Code of Ethics for Librarians and Other Information Workers. That was endorsed in 2012, and that document just really sets out a series of ethical propositions for the guidance of individual librarians in their practice and for library associations in general. So it's basically articulating the values that shape our professional practices and our behaviours as library and information professionals. And it's this: information service in the interest of social, cultural and economic well-being is at the heart of librarianship, and therefore librarians have social responsibility. And I bolded that bit myself. That's not, part of the original document. So what are your thoughts on reading that statement? Does it resonate with your own view of the profession of librarianship? I doubt there's anyone here present who would disagree with the sentiment in this statement. although there is very likely to be differing views amongst you about what social responsibility actually entails in this context, and the extent to which we need to go as information professionals to discharge this responsibility. In our own National Public Library Strategy, I'm sure most of you have had a look, at least a glance at it, the library is the place. They state that the mission of public libraries is to enrich the lives of people and communities in Ireland by providing universal access to information and resources to promote reading and enjoyment, lifelong learning, the skills, education and cultural engagement. Fundamentally, service is woven into the fabric of our work. It's what we do, and our identities as librarians, no matter what. I know we're in the Academic and Special Libraries Conference, but as librarians in any sector, service is woven into our identities. And in this room, again, I don't want to speak on behalf of everyone, but I think it's most likely that we share a perception of libraries and librarians as fully committed to serving all our diverse patron communities, to striving for and upholding freedom of expression, free and equitable access to information in all formats, and of course, to advocating for ethical information practices, particularly in an age when so much is being transformed by technological advances. I also wanted just to add another quotation here. This is a quotation from the former CEO of CILIP, Nick Poole. Some of you may know him, may have met him at some point. And this is a speech he gave several years ago. And I think it captures this vision of socially oriented library work. I like this. When I say like, I mean I think this is an interesting quotation because I think it might evoke feelings. It certainly evoked feelings in me. I want people to know when they meet a librarian, they are dealing with someone who has made a lifelong commitment to fighting inequality and justice and to securing universal freedom of thought and expression. Hold that thought for now. We move on to the next bit. So social responsibility of libraries and the importance of that. The second quotation I want to share is from Fabatsi Aitar's highly influential article from 2018. Some of you might recognise. It made my head spin when I first read it, in a good way. It was a very transformative piece for me personally, the first time I encountered it. And in the article, Fabatsi articulates the, I suppose, provocative concept of vocational awe for librarians. And in doing so, I feel she kind of raises very critical questions about the sacrifices that we are sometimes subtly, or maybe not so subtly, called upon to make as a profession in seeking to fulfill our important social role, or the sacrifices we impose on ourselves in doing so. So let's look at the quotation. When the rhetoric surrounding librarianship borders on vocational and sacred language, rather than acknowledging that librarianship is a profession or a discipline, and as an institution historically and contemporarily flawed, we do ourselves a disservice. Because the sacred duties of freedom, information and service are so momentous, the library worker is easily paralysed. In the face of grand missions of literacy and freedom, advocating for your full lunch break feels petty. You can see the connection between this and what Helen was talking about this morning, that we need to look after ourselves as well as our communities, as our public. And what I think she means here is that we risk becoming diminished rather than enriched by our dedication to our jobs as librarians if we allow the vocational to eclipse the professional, and if we fail to ensure that our personal and emotional well-being and material needs are adequately catered for in our professional situations. She refers to mission creep in this context. You know this term, I'm sure. And to illustrate this, she uses the very powerful example of public librarians in the United States who were trained to administer Narcan, so it's an opioid reversal, overdose reversal medication, to patrons either on or near the library premises. Obviously a role that seems very far from the traditional expectations of public library service. So what she's doing there is, I think, urging us to advocate for ourselves, to balance the importance of the services we provide to our communities with equal care and attention to our own health and mental well-being. And she seeks to reassure us that it's not wrong for librarians to ask for conditions that enable them to thrive, as well as the communities that they serve. I don't think any of us would really disagree with that. I know she's gone, but I also want to reference Helen, our keynote speaker from this morning, because she also raised the issue of vocational law in her text, because it's so central to understanding ourselves as professionals and to protecting ourselves as professionals. She says, recognising and balancing vocational law is crucial to maintaining a healthy work-life harmony and preventing burnout. I don't know if anybody disagrees with that. I'm happy to talk with you afterwards if you do, but I just find that a fascinating concept, and I'll explain why I think it's fascinating in the context of this project. That's one perception. I showed you another perception. I don't think the statements are mutually exclusive, even though it could seem that way. I think it's accurate to say that our profession, particularly public librarianship, is very deeply entwined with the social and cultural fabric of society. And librarians who work in this sector make an irreplaceable contribution to the development of social and cultural capital in our societies. And this is right at the heart of the conference team today, Cultivating Connection, Librarians Championing Quality, Wellbeing and Inclusivity. It's not provocative or controversial to proudly state this. This is what we do. However, it is also reasonable to simultaneously express caution at the emotional toll that this social responsibility can sometimes take on those who carry it, if they don't also carry an equal concern for their own well-being, their staff's well-being, and the sustainability of the sector and profession as a whole. I wanted to start with these statements because I believe they're absolutely central to the project that we worked on last year. Essentially, this is, at heart, a story. It's a story of librarians who went above and beyond in the fight to preserve and protect our most precious freedom, the freedom for all members of society, including marginalised and disenfranchised communities, to read and access information and educational opportunities without fear of censorship or censure. And to this I also want to add the really powerful statement that our own Library Association, obviously ASL are part of that, they issued when the attacks and the agitation on libraries were at their height in 2023, and it's also in the foreword of our project report, which some of you maybe have read. Recent censorship efforts undermined intellectual freedom and threatened the core values of libraries. The LAI strongly opposes any restrictions on library collections or services and stands against intimidating library staff. Libraries must remain inclusive spaces for all community members. So, our project is about two things, really. One, it's a first-hand account of the aggressive censorship challenges to LGBTQ+ materials and programmes that really shook up Irish public libraries over the past 3 years. Secondly, it's a platform on which the actual voices of the librarians can be heard, as they describe their experiences of being targeted by agitators who used every possible means, including social media attacks, to try to intimidate and browbeat them into removing books from the shelves and cancelling their LGBTQ+ inclusive programmes. It's an opportunity to understand what happened, how it was and is being handled, and what toll it has taken on the staff involved. In other words, the cost of doing good work. So I'll take a drink. Okay. Just for an additional small piece of context, I won't spend a long time on this, but I think it's important to at least mention it. The issue of trauma in library work as an additional framework for contextualising the study findings, particularly as it relates to the impact of the agitation on the library staff we spoke to. This is a growing area, a welcome growing area of research in LIS that recognises that trauma, and in some cases PTSD, is experienced by library staff and managers in all types of libraries across all demographics, including age, gender, ability, ethnicity, all of that. And outside of the targeted attacks on the library materials that I'm talking about today, this area of research acknowledges that library staff, for the most part, receive little or no training on how to interact with patrons who may be homeless, who may experience mental health crises, substance abuse issues, all of that. And on top of that, the process of having to frequently interact with patrons who have experienced trauma can cause high levels of vicarious stress for library staff who may not have the tools to handle these issues. And one example, as you can see there, is the Trauma in the Library project. It's an ongoing study in the US that's investigating the prevalence and extent of traumatic incidents and PTSD among library staff across all library sectors, not just public libraries. It's a really extensive project. They've done a survey of more than 1,000 participants and nearly 70 librarians, interviews with nearly 70 librarians to explore their experiences of trauma in their work. And the findings really point to rising stress and trauma in library work with lots of different causes, including things like intra-staff conflicts, hence our discussion on kindness this morning, as well as issues relating to library patrons. And from our point of view, censorship challenges were raised in the findings as an issue that's causing stress and trauma, so very relevant. They also found that the most frequently reported types of traumas were verbal abuse and physical assault, which has caused health problems such as anxiety and depression among library staff. And the study also found that many librarians reported that the support they received from their managers was inadequate, that they felt unprepared to deal with the aggressive and sometimes violent incidents arising in the course of a working day. And the authors of the study linked the rise in trauma to factors including a decline in community support and social capital and an increase in library staff, and this might sound familiar to some of you, essentially serving as frontline workers during the pandemic. So the overhanging trauma from that is coming through now, and it's being found out by this research. So our point of departure for this research was first to acknowledge that public librarians have in many ways been the first line of defence against the attacks on LGBTQ+ materials and programmes in Ireland during the past few years, and in some cases this has been a profoundly traumatic experience that has been made very public through not only through media reporting, which in fairness has been largely supportive of the library staff, but also by the extensive social media coverage, which more often than not is circulated by the agitators themselves to try and gain support for their so-called cause. Secondly, we wanted to hear about it from the librarians themselves to understand how the events have affected them, both professionally and personally. And thirdly, in gathering this evidence, we wanted to find out what measures have been put in place and what measures are yet to be taken to protect library staff, library patrons, and the library's mission to provide inclusive services and programmes for all of their communities, including the LGBTQ+ community. So there's a lot in that, right? A lot going on there, but it is really at the heart of what we were looking at in this study. So just some, I suppose, more, I guess, political context for the study and kind of why it inspired us. Libraries as contested spaces. I'm sure you're all aware, public libraries, school libraries, and some places even bookshops have become increasingly contested spaces over the last few years, mainly in relation to the provision of LGBTQ+ materials and programmes for young people. This is probably most clearly exemplified by what's going on in the United States. The attempts at censorship, book banning, and particularly in the context of the current political climate, the rise of far-right ideology and organised online conspiracy groups. That's the United States. However, the very dramatic escalation of similar incidents in Irish public libraries, particularly during 2023, was really shocking and maybe a little surprising in view of the shift in Ireland towards a more liberal and accepting Irish society over the past 30 years, which some of us who are old enough have lived through. There have been really seminal and hopeful events in Ireland. The marriage equality referendum in 2015, the more recent referendum to repeal the 8th Amendment, all of that really seemed to signpost that as a society we're separating from our, let's say, more conservative past. You know, when books, music and other media were banned, often on religious grounds. We've moved away from that largely. So it's great, but the events of 2023 showed that despite all of this wonderful social progress, we're not actually immune to the rise of far-right conspirators and the disinformation and moral panic that they're spreading against the LGBTQ+ community. There were signs of this back in 2019 when a drag story time was cancelled in DLR libraries due to concerns about, and I quote, the high level of degrading, inappropriate comments on social media about the performers and library staff, and fears for the safety of participants if the event was to go ahead. So I don't know how much you know about drag story times. You can see one right there. Drag story times or story hours, they involve drag queens or kings reading age-appropriate materials, stories to children. They've been a particular target of these confrontations for obvious reasons. And one of the more high-profile incidents in recent years took place in the main library in Tralee, Kerry. Do you remember that? It's in the papers, all over the media. It was during the Kingdom Pride celebrations in July 2023, when a group of 5 protesters, they travelled up from Cork, they burst into the library where a drag story time was taking place. They assaulted several people, and they started screaming at the library staff and performers, accusing them of grooming children and calling them prostitutes, among other names. And they're words I never really thought I'd have to say in a library presentation, and there are other words later that I never thought I'd have to have in a presentation to librarians. So this happened in Tralee. This was all live streamed, of course it was, and the videos were posted online, went viral. This particular event actually involved 2 drag kings who are both Garda vetted, reading from a fairy tale book called Prince and Knight, aimed at 4 to 8-year-olds, and containing no representation of sex or anything unsuitable for children. But I suppose on a more uplifting note, this is actually one of the incidents where the disruptors have had to face legal consequences for their actions. I don't know if you're aware of this, but in December last year, 3 of them were actually convicted of public order offences, with 2 of them being found guilty of assault. So maybe there's some justice coming down the road. So, am I on the next one? Yeah. So in 2023, as again, I'm sure you're all aware, this all really escalated around the country, taking place in nearly all counties, Dublin, Louth, Leitrim, Cork, Kerry, Mayo, other counties as well. And the modus operandi of these groups usually follows a standard pattern, which again, I'm sure a lot of you know what that is because you've seen it. So, agitators will first march to or gather outside a library or a bookshop, and then they'll enter the premises and locate the books they're targeting. They always have a list. And then they'll confront the library staff about the content of the books and insist that the books have to be removed because they're inappropriate for young people. Sometimes they'll tear up the books, they'll walk out with them. In a couple of cases, in sharing a few findings before we actually get to them, they took a book down to the guards, that right, Faye, and another to a priest's house, the local priest's house, and the books were never returned to the library. So this kind of thing. So the entire incidents are usually filmed and live streamed on social media, with individual clips of interactions then uploaded to other social media and shared. They go viral and seen by thousands of people, sometimes internationally. And the line most often taken by these agitator groups is focused on disinformation and what they characterise as indoctrination of young people with LGBTQ plus ideology, and the demonising of the LGBTQ plus community as groomers, which is a slur that, as you know, has traditionally been used to undermine this community. And you'll sometimes see this with the green T-shirts and the green hoodies they wear with education, not indoctrination. So just a couple of two of the more high-profile examples, incidents rather, that you might recall from the time when they were reported in the media. The first was in Swords in Dublin, and this was around 30 agitators, some of them holding banners, some of them shouting and screaming. They marched from the Pavilions shopping centre up to the library, under Garda escort, might I say. And then, again, under Garda escort, 4 representatives from that group, the larger group, were escorted into the library, where they then aggressively confronted the library staff for about 15 minutes. They handed out leaflets that listed 6 titles that they claimed were unsuitable for children, including the really well-known one, This Book is Gay, by Juno Dawson. That's been a real target of the protests. And then others like the Trans Teen Survival Guide. The second example then was very high profile in the City Library and Grand Parade in Cork in July 2023. A group of agitators set up microphones and chairs across the street from the library. And they hung, you can see in the picture there, they hung a banner over the library door that said there are only two genders, male and female, which they then refused to take down when the library staff asked them to. They billed this event as Cork Says No, and it was organised by the leaders of Ireland First, you know, by the title even. They're one of the far-right political parties that kind of sprang up at the time. And then there was a counter-protest organised by Forza, the union, and obviously tensions rose when the two groups confronted each other, and then the decision was made, unfortunately, to close the library early due to public safety concerns. So what's notable in both of those instances, actually, was that counter-demonstrations also did spring up, with members of the public coming together to support and protect the library staff. So I did say there were uplifting elements to this. This is one of them, that the public will come out and help and band together and, you know, protect their staff. They're just two examples, three if you include the drag story time. But I suppose what's unsurprising is that the people involved in this agitation, and it is actually a relatively small number despite the amount of noise they make, they're the same people who are at the centre of the anti-COVID vaccine and lockdown demonstrations and protests during the pandemic. And now they've turned their attention, as I'm sure you're aware, to immigration, asylum seekers and refugees. It's like a rent-a-mob, okay? They just come out with whatever far-right agenda they're following at a particular time. A lot of them have a very hardline religious or conservative background. And they are, unfortunately, highly coordinated and organised, and that reflects very similar platformised movements in the States that have, unfortunately, been very successful in having books removed from libraries and school curricula in the States. So it's happening here too. So it's a critical concern that certainly in the States it's still growing, it's still happening, it's escalating. And we're not entirely sure what's going to happen here yet. We'll have to wait and see. Very quickly, because again, I'm conscious of time. Sorry, I just want to go back. There we go. Just a few words about the sectoral response to date to the agitators, because I think it's important to highlight what's actually happening as well. The trade union Forza, they're the trade union for public library workers. They have been extremely active and proactive in supporting librarians, particularly down in Cork, and they've been central to mobilising the support and providing guidance to libraries and actually dealing with this agitation. They're active in the counter rallies. They've called for legal challenges to be made to allow library workers to ban certain members of the public from entering a library if they repeatedly engage in confrontation. There's no legal framework to do that yet at the moment. The QLA, then the Queer Library Alliance, a group of LGBTQ+ library staff and allies. They were formed in 2023 directly to combat the censorship challenges and to advocate for inclusivity. So they're still going. The LGMA then also issued a set of guidelines in late 2023 to help public libraries handle the disruptions. So to give them kind of tailored responses that they can use in different scenarios, like if they receive an abusive phone call or if somebody comes in and starts filming them. So kind of scripts almost that they can use. And then, of course, the LAI really came out strongly and condemned the attacks during Library Ireland Week in 2023 with that powerful statement. So these disruptions in Ireland really reflect global trends of resistance to LGBTQ+ representation globally. It's a global issue. So we thought it's so critical to do research into this, to find out how it's impacting the sector, librarianship as a whole, and very importantly, the librarians themselves and the toll it's taken on them. So with that, to kind of move into describing the project and getting into the findings and all of that, that was our goal, that we wanted to explore the impact of the anti-LGBTQ+ agitation on libraries, librarians, and the communities they serve. Our research was funded by the Irish Research Council. It's now Research Ireland, and it was the New Foundations Award scheme. It was conducted by us, UCD, our UCD research team. With our formal partner, we had to have a community partner under this scheme rather, and our community partner was LGBT Ireland. This was led by Padraig Rice. He was the lead collaborator. He's now a TD down south somewhere, I think Cork. Yeah, Cork. We also had a steering committee to provide oversight and guidance, composed of librarians and other stakeholders, a union member, those kind of stakeholders. And these were our research questions to shape the project. We had 3. How do public libraries in Ireland select, develop and maintain inclusive collections and programming for LGBTQ+ community, particularly for youths? What are the experiences of library staff in managing and responding to public complaints, agitation or disruption concerning LGBTQ+ materials and programming? And then, I think maybe the most important, how do library staff perceive the impact of disruption and agitation regarding all of this on their workplace safety, their professional responsibilities and the broader library community? So they were our guiding questions, if you like, and our design, for those of you who are interested in method and methodology, some of you probably are, the nature of the project meant that we chose a qualitative research design because we wanted to explore experiences and perceptions, and specifically semi-structured interviews, to really allow us to be flexible, because these were difficult conversations a lot of the time. It was important that we could be adaptable and flexible and also caring at times in our conversations, because some of our participants were quite distressed in describing what had happened in their libraries and to themselves. So that was one of the reasons we chose this approach. We created interview schedules for 3 sets of participants. I guess we decided to divide our participants into managerial and non-managerial staff, because we felt that the perceptions or the experiences and perceptions of managers would be quite different to, I say frontline, some managers of course are frontline, and this was some debate we had around the terminology that we're going to use, so managerial and non-managerial, but the non-managerial staff were primarily those who would kind of sit on the desks and be the direct target, if you like, in a lot of cases of the agitators. So we had 26 participants overall, and also 3 stakeholder interviews as well, just for additional context. They were carried out via Zoom from June to October last year, all anonymised, of course, to ensure this, because of the very sensitive nature of this topic, meant that anonymity was absolutely paramount. All identifying information was removed from everything. So, we don't even, if we look at the scripts now, we don't even know who we're talking to in a lot of cases because everything was stripped out. We had 19 managerial staff members compared to 7 non-managerial public library staff members. I suppose we kind of looked at this imbalance, and it was somewhat of a concern for us, quite a significant difference. And we felt that maybe it reflected the managers' greater flexibility in their libraries. One of the things that did actually come up with a few people was that some of the non-managerial staff were actually barred from participating in our interviews by their managers, which was somewhat suggestive of organisational gatekeeping that we didn't really explore further. We just noted. It was quite disappointing. But we did talk to 7 non-managerial public librarians. And again, all identifying details removed from the transcripts and findings. And we took this ethical approach to allow the participants to share their perspectives candidly without any fear of backlash. Because again, it's such a sensitive topic and it's so personal that it had to be that way. So the data analysis, again, for those of you who are interested in how we did it, collaborative coding with inter-coder reliability checks to ensure that the key themes were strong, that we all agreed on them. And this kind of very structured approach allowed us to have a very nuanced understanding then of the librarian's experience. We shared our codes, we kind of talked through the codes with each other. We had a lot of meetings where we kind of went through this. And it was an interesting exercise, I will say. We also, just to say, we did receive ethical approval. It's always just important to note that, especially, and we had to go through a few hoops, like back and forth, to get ethical approval for this. But we did, and we received that. So just the findings, which I'm sure you're all, how are we doing for time? Okay. I'm sure you're all, dying to know what we found out. The findings are presented under these 6 core themes that really kind of reflect the foci of our interviews with the with the participants. I'm going to go through them one by one and just kind of show you some quotations, the summary of what they told us. So the first was collection and program development, because we felt it was important to kind of have that context to understand how the libraries were building their collections and developing their programs for the LGBTQ plus community. How the libraries were dealing with complaints. And that's quite interesting because there's different levels of complaint that we'll see. Not all of them are bad. So it was just important to make that point. The third theme then, how the librarians went about managing the agitators. And again, this is just a little aside here. I don't know if I have time for it, but just a little aside here about the terminology that we used. We had quite a lot of back and forth with our steering group about our terminology, because they were really, really insistent, well, some of them were, that we didn't use the word protesters in this project. You get it? Because that they felt that was legitimizing what these groups were doing if we used that word. So we had a lot of back and forth, and we eventually agreed on the term agitators and disruptors, or disruption, agitation and disruption, because we felt that kind of demonstration is okay as well. It's kind of less, I suppose, legitimizing than something like protest, but agitation and disruption, just a little aside there, just to kind of explain why we're using those terms. It wasn't just us, it was our steering committee who were very insistent, and they were right. So the approaches and reactions to managing the agitators, the actions of the agitators, and then the section I worked on personally, the insights into librarians' experiences and feelings, which was quite harrowing at times to see what they went through. And then a final theme was just because of the platformized nature of this disruption and the use of social media, we felt that warranted its own theme. Actually, that was a suggestion from our steering group as well, that they felt that we should bring that out more, and we did. So social media and the role of social media in all of this. Now, we did ask a couple of demographic questions as well, just to establish a few things. Firstly, we asked the participants the frequency with which they engage with the public directly in their day-to-day job. Again, just to get a sense of, how much in the front line, I guess, they were. And our participants told us 50% of them involved daily engagement with the public, 38.5 occasional engagement with the public. So managerial level staff typically covering for breaks, that kind of thing. And then 11.5% of our participants told us that they never engaged directly with the public in their jobs. They had in their other jobs before, but in this particular job, they were, I guess, behind the scenes. We also wanted to know, had they experienced disruption directly from agitators? And 54% had personally, in their own place of work, been targeted by direct disruption, and 46% hadn't. But I will say, and it's an important point to make, that even if you weren't directly targeted, you were still very much affected by the overall impact of all of this on the profession and the incessant reporting of this, the incessant social media coverage and all of that. So everybody was affected, but some people had actual direct experience of that. So the actual themes themselves. The first theme, so I'm going to fall over that. The first theme, collection and program development. So this is really interesting because the librarians we spoke to told us that, in general, they want to create spaces that are welcoming and cater for the needs of all patron communities, rather than seeking to prioritise one single group. And that was fair enough. They really wanted to emphasise that inclusivity is at the heart of their approach, to service provision in all respects. They do obviously support the LGBTQ plus community through providing specific collections, materials, programmes at times, and these are often developed in collaboration with LGBTQ plus representative organisations and stakeholders. So libraries might, for example, display the Pride flag and host Pride Week activities, during Pride Week, which I think is usually in June, isn't it? Yeah, to show support. Some of the rural librarians did actually kind of report challenges around this, though, this type of outreach in their own libraries due to, I suppose, historical lack of LGBTQ plus visibility in their communities, which I guess is just a fact of life really there. So the collections included things like LGBTQ plus that's hard to say all the time, isn't it? LGBTQ plus themed books across age groups in various formats, so like traditional print books, audiobooks, ebooks. They also told us that collection development is largely centralised in public libraries, with the county or city headquarters selecting the materials, although the individual librarians did tell us that they do supplement their collections, their local collections, based on their local community needs, including LGBTQ+. Some of the librarians told us they actively advocate for more LGBTQ+ titles, but obviously budget constraints came up again and again as quite a limiting factor. They do follow collection development policies, and I want to emphasise this, where they exist. They did not exist in all regions to ensure the diverse collections. Although this was a bit of a contentious issue, because some of the librarians we spoke to talked about how a policy in one county, say with regard to age classification of material, was different to another county. And there's no consistency, they told us, across the country as a whole, if you like. So this was something of a contentious issue in some of the interviews. So programming ranges from things like the drag story times, of course, LGBTQ+ book clubs, LGBTQ+ themed bingo, youth drop-in sessions, stuff like that. And again, often tied to community events like Pride. However, they did say that some events do face low engagement or there's concerns over the community reactions, again, rural areas, particularly in this respect. They all told us that they conduct risk assessments now when they're planning programmes or events to mitigate potential disruptions. This has come in, it's here to stay. They do it in all cases, just to make sure that the libraries remain safe for staff and patrons. Here are just some, and again, I hope you can see this. I think you'll probably get the slides, won't you, afterwards, or I'll certainly send them to anybody who wants. I've no problem at all. Just some quotations from our participants, just to kind of capture some of those things. The bottom one, I think, is the really interesting one, right? I felt that the library was caving to intimidation. So what I mean by that is that whereas before all of these books were just on the floor with their correct category, some of them were sort of 12-year-old books, some of them 14-year-old, they were all taken off. They mean they're taken off the shelves. And the age range was raised. So what this librarian was talking about was the reclassification of LGBTQ+ materials due to kind of pressure or the perception of pressure. And they disagreed with that. They thought it was a bad thing to do. Because then parental consent was needed. That's very problematic for some library users who may not want their parents to know that they're accessing these materials. It causes problems for, community members who are already, having challenges around this and maybe disenfranchised around this. So that was an interesting, and it came up again in different ways, as you'll see. Dealing with complaints. So one of the, are we okay for time? 20? Oh my gosh. Happy days. Okay. I'm so paranoid about time. And questions too, okay. Great. Right, so second theme then, how the library staff actually deal with complaints that come into them. Now this was and this is the category you worked on, Faye, right? So I'm sure Faye will be happy to answer questions about this afterwards. This is so interesting that the people we spoke to, the librarians, really wanted to differentiate between complaints that came in from what they kind of termed regular library users and differentiate between them and then the actions from the agitators regarding LGBTQ+ materials and programmes. This was really important to them to emphasise to us. The regular library users tend to follow the established complaints procedures where they exist in all libraries to express their concerns about materials. And they often found that this would come in around Pride Month, particularly. And they also told us that it was often associated with this kind of broader sense of discomfort that the library users would have around sexual education content. So not specifically maybe targeted at LGBTQ+, but part of a broader concern around, or as they say, discomfort around this. In contrast, the agitators would seek to bypass the formal channels, clearly, and they'd stage their demonstrations and their disruptions, and they'd leave everybody feeling unsafe. So you can see there were three types of complainant. The regular users, again, who voice their concerns through the official procedures, the agitators who disrupt library operations, and a third category, this is really interesting as well, individuals who would kind of come in, who had seen misinformation circulating on social media, on TikTok or whatever, and they might get sucked in a little bit by that. And they'd come into the library then to kind of confront the staff based on what they had read online, in most cases, misinformation. So that was really interesting. And often you'll see in this kind of social media narratives a lot of this kind of citing of misinterpreted legal frameworks. So they'd cite, is it the Children First Act, and they'd have a preamble printed out. That was sort of nonsense, really. They'd cite this, that, and the other, but it would all sound very legalese and it was very formal. And they'd kind of wave this around in front of them, and some of the people then would come in, the kind of fairly regular individuals, if you like, they'd come in and they'd be concerned about this because they'd have seen all this legal stuff and they'd be a little bit worried about that. I think, again, Faye, you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think there was a sense that, there was more, not a pity, but more a sense of sympathy with the people who came in, with that, because it was kind of like, gosh, they've been sucked in by the conspiracy or whatever, and, Correct, yeah. So they really wanted to get this across to us, and I thought that was just an interesting kind of, because librarians essentially are extremely good people who want to see the good in, good in people. So they really wanted to make those distinctions for us, and we were happy to. Sorry, did I skip anything there? Yeah, no, just it's all there. So there again some quotations, just to kind of capture those differences. They weren't aggressive in any way. They told me about the different laws that we were breaking and having pornography in the library. And I knew by what they were saying, because they had a sheet in front of them, it was very prompted. They were reading and they were telling me about, I didn't recognise them from being in the library previously because we're in such a rural area. You kind of know your local people. So they would be people who would come in from somewhere else and they'd have this legalese stuff. And then the regular person, they're just a normal person. They come into the library every week with their child. And this particular incident, they came in, they went straight for the whatever section it was, and it was probably Juno Dawson's book or one of those, yeah. They picked it up and said, do you think this is appropriate? And they'd been influenced in some way. They were regular users. And then you can see the librarian in this case was able to kind of just chat to them, and they knew them. They had, it wasn't confrontational, it was more of a chat. But then they picked up the book and they said, this is not coming back. That could have been the priest one, was it, or the Garda one? Yeah. So just these kind of weird interactions that, you think a person, they're in every week, and then this happens. So different types of complainants, but important to differentiate between them. So how do they manage all of this? How do they approach it? And this is where I feel stuff gets really interesting, and we'll see at the end there. First of all, they reported that they do kind of two things. They emphasise preparedness and safety. Clearly, that's important to do that. And they try to anticipate future incidents. And this was an interesting thing, actually, that came out, that they tried to ensure that the library staff, so the non-managerial staff maybe, or the staff under them, this is the managers who tell us this, they'd kind of try to ensure that the staff were assigned roles based on their ability to handle confrontation. 10, okay. Because not everybody is able to handle confrontation in the same way. So not everybody's equally equipped. So they did things like scenario planning, role playing to try and build confidence of the librarians. Another interesting thing was that they had also started to, maybe some of them, not all of them, monitoring what the agitators were doing online, and then kind of using that to plan what they were going to do. But there was some debate around this, whether this is just fear-mongering, it increases the fear, or whether it helps with preparedness. They nearly all installed panic buttons. They were trying to forge stronger ties with the local Gardaí. Some of the libraries had buddy systems, particularly for remote branches, where there's only maybe one or two staff members. And things like passive resistance strategies, which is remaining silent when you're confronted, not rising to it, if you like. But it was important to note that this is very emotionally taxing to do that, to retain your cool when somebody's screaming in your face that you're a paedophile or whatever they're doing. And this was a huge strain on some of the staff. The most, I think, concerning thing we found was this chilling effect that we kind of started to discern in what we were being told, that this was the idea that some events they'd been planned in person, they were moved online, or they were cancelled altogether, or some of the librarians told us they weren't allowed put LGBTQ plus programs on because of concerns about attracting agitators. This is a really cautious approach that we noted, and we felt that this maybe points to what we call a chilling effect, and I've kind of defined that there. It's where if something it's not directly banned, but the fear of what might happen if it goes ahead leads it to be cancelled. And this is maybe the effect that the agitators wanted in the first place, this kind of chilling effect. So that came through quite a lot of the comments from the participants. And again, you can see some quotations there. And again, there's words there that I never thought I would have in a library presentation, to be honest with you. Like it's really something. And again, I'll circulate the slides, or you'll get them somehow so you can read these in more detail. And of course, you can read them in our report. I know we are short of time now. I was too comfortable there for a few minutes. Now I'm flying. So the actions of agitators. So they essentially use three main tactics: organised disruptions, online and offline harassment, and then targeted complaints against LGBTQ plus materials to intimidate staff, to disrupt events and exert pressure on libraries to censor the content. So the examples I gave earlier were, pretty much the modus operandi, that they'd come in, they'd have these confrontations, they'd escalate them into full-scale disruption, and sometimes libraries were forced to close. One library had a power cut at one stage to force early closure. And then obviously beyond physical intimidation, social media intimidation, emails, abusive phone calls, digital harassment, a lot of directed, targeted online trolling and attacks. Some staff members were directly named and subjected to sustained abuse. All this sort of thing. Things like LGBTQ books, pride flags and inclusive programs were particular targets. They demanded the removal of materials, used inflammatory language and misrepresented books to justify their censorship attempt, and all this pseudo-legal stuff as well. So again, they're quite long quotations there, but I think we selected these because they really capture what the hell was going on in the libraries and what they were doing and how the staff were, oh my God, 5, okay. Can I have maybe 2 or 3 more? Oh, sorry, I'll do my best. This is the section I worked on, and I found it really, really emotionally taxing to work on as well. I was actually kind of stunned at what they told us about the effect this has had on them. Very significant emotional and physical impacts: stress, trauma, anxiety, either from being directly targeted, which some of them were, or just by the kind of ongoing, constant fear that the agitators were going to come in next to their library. And they were kind of monitoring. They'd say, well, they're here this week. Are they going to be in with us next week? And this kind of constant fear, especially those who'd been, verbally harassed and filmed or publicly shamed online, which some of them were. So this kind of heightened anxiety. Another thing we found, which was kind of interesting, that there was intra-staff tensions between maybe some members of staff didn't fully disagree with the ideology of the agitators, and maybe they felt that, well, maybe they've a point, and then other staff members, of course, completely disagreed with it. So they felt they couldn't discuss this amongst themselves openly. It wasn't, it was very stressful. There was some comment about the lack of response from upper or sectoral management. They hadn't done enough. They were caving to the agitators by not kind of, or by silently preventing programs from going ahead, or by reclassifying books, the age classification. So there was some sense of a weak or reactive response from upper management, which kind of came through. But the positive thing there is that really came out a really strong sense of resilience and solidarity among the library staff, the kindness I spoke about at the start. A lot of talk about bringing cake in to feed each other and stuff like that. So lovely, and they really see their work as essential and important in fostering inclusion and community support, and very unwavering support for each other. And they spoke about having a strong community around them. Again, a quick preview of the quotations, but again, you can read them afterwards, or you can see them in the report itself. The final theme before I go to the roundup focuses on the social media use, and you can kind of see there that this was a particular target, a particular tactic, if you like, of the agitators, where they record them and then they'd be afraid of being doxxed. I'm sure a lot of you know what doxing is, the publishing personal information on the internet. So this fear was particularly egregious. Some of the social media posts made parents not want to visit the libraries with their children, which is devastating for public library staff. Children are such a part of that. And again, the civil in-person interactions you'd have with the library user, and then the online hostility from the same person. Very difficult to reconcile that. And then some generational differences noted with some of the older colleagues found the social media stuff particularly distressing because they're maybe less used to it than the younger generations. And empathy fatigue and collective stress was something that kind of came out of that. So again, just some more quotations to capture that. Now I know we're almost out of time, so I am just going to do the little round up there. You can kind of see look, there's so much in this. I could stand here for another 2 hours easily. I'm not going to, but I could. The things we learned, that there are obviously significant challenges from all of these organised social media-driven agitations, require strategic response, particularly in collection policies. There need to be a standard collection policy across the whole country that everybody agrees on. And all of this, things like programming, staff training, safety measures and communication to uphold intellectual freedom. Important also to partner with LGBTQ plus groups in program development, to foster inclusivity, reduce the backlash, and to position libraries as collaborative spaces rather than contested ones. The chilling effect was a concern. This cautious approach that we discerned in that, making risk management, staff support and security measures essential to avoid that chilling effect. Ongoing staff training, absolutely mandatory. Conflict resolution, social media navigation, just to strengthen their resilience and confidence that they can deal with this. And obviously things like effective communication and external resources to support the staff. Importantly, we learned that libraries uphold intellectual freedom and equitable access to knowledge, especially for marginalised groups, making staff support essential. Some recommendations, you can just see there. I want to rush through this because I want to end on the positive note that I promised you. It's coming. So I don't even need to maybe even read them. You can kind of see that there should be greater public recognition for what public libraries do, and the really important role they play. Their operations should be transparent to all staff, not just to upper management. There should be clear communication from management to frontline staff. It wasn't always the case. And staff input to decision-making and advocacy for equitable information access. Again, collection policies and codes of conduct should be publicly accessible and uniform across the country, with staff trained to implement them, and then actively engaging with LGBTQ plus communities, training, CPD opportunities, collaborations with initiatives like the Hope and Courage Collective was one suggestion for us for staff support. And then safety, clear security strategies, and collaborate with social media platforms to address agitators. Obviously, this is all quite idealistic. This is the ideal situation. Whether this will actually happen, who knows? And I wanted to quote Helen again because she did actually talk about non-violent communication and how that can help in these kind of censorship challenge situations. So those kind of things. And just to end then on, I love this. This is my favorite quotation from the whole report. And I am actually going to read it out because it ends on I love the library. I love working in the library. This hasn't put a dent in that at all. It was literally one of the most difficult days of my life. Like, it was mental health-wise dealing with this stress, but I'm glad I was there, as if I was able to do it, I was proud of myself coming out of it, because I would support my colleagues quite a lot. It really did. Crystallized in me that this is definitely what I want to do for the rest of my life. Like, it's such an important service and can make a difference. And I think that is the message to take from this horrible pain and nastiness, that ultimately the people we spoke to feel that their work is worthwhile. They feel that it is something that is hard, it's difficult, but they want to do it because they feel it's important. And the picture there is uplifting because it's one of the counter demonstrations that where the public came out to support the library staff. It was organised by Forsa, but you can see it's just ordinary members of the public who don't want to put up with this stuff anymore. So with that, I just want to thank you, and I also want to thank our wonderful participants who were so generous with their time, with their honesty and their openness. We couldn't have done it without them and their stories, and our steering group also. QR code to access the full report, also a link. It's online, you can read it. My email address if you want to reach out directly. And thank you all so much. I'm so pleased to have presented this today to you. Thank you.